What is up, humans of the cardboard? Welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today I am doing something a little bit different from what I normally do. Today we are doing a kind of like a budget guide to monsters, main deck monsters specifically in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is going to be pretty quick and simple because I really don't think you need to go too in depth here as far as, you know, main deck monsters go. There's really only a couple of facets that you really want to make sure you're covering as far as generic stuff, because when you're talking about a budget player, I think the most important thing you need to do is get those budget staples. You just want the staples that can be swapped in and out of decks easily and kind of translate from deck to deck. So even when you do want to build a new deck, you don't have to buy all these new cards for it. You have to obviously buy the core of the deck, but these generic cards will still translate over into the new decks regardless. So I think one of the most important things is hand traps, obviously, right? Hand traps are such a huge part of the game. If you want to try and play more competitively, if you're going second, you got to have something like hand traps or hard going second cards, Kaijus, etc. We'll talk about a couple of those as well, but I think mainly today, as far as the main deck stuff goes, we are going to try to focus mostly on hand traps. So obviously we know that Ash Blossom, even for the cheapest copies, are like $20+ right now. Impermanence, same thing, and those are two of the better hand traps in the format. I'm not going to lie to you, these cards aren't going to exactly replace those with the same level of power, but they do a decent job at covering what those cards do for you as well. And I still would recommend at some point trying to get your hands on those cards, whether it's waiting for reprints and the prices to drop even further, whether it's trading for them so you're not just outright paying for them, whether it's, you know, opening them luckily out of packs, who knows. I still would recommend you grabbing those more expensive hand traps, Nib, Ash, Imperm, when you can. I just want to make sure that's that's agreed upon. All right, so let's start off here with, I think, like the most important ones for hand traps. I think the first one has to be Effect Veiler. Effect Veiler is essentially pseudo impermanence. It's a monster, so it turns on things like triple tactics talents, but that's a very specific interaction. Other than that, the only thing it's different in is that it can only activate on your opponent's main phase, but as far as what the card does, it's like the same exact thing as an impermanence. Quick effect, target a monster, negate its effects until the end of the turn. That's still pretty good. And this first patch of cards, you can get a playset, and every copy is going to be at least under $1. That's like what I was focusing on this first part. So this is going to be super budget, the first part, and we'll get to stuff that's slightly more expensive, but still very, very affordable. So Veiler is probably the most important one. It's probably the most generally effective hand trap across like against like most decks you're going to play against. That's still super budget. It's already being played a lot right now. Next up is DD Crow. Like, I know DD Crow may not be super played right now in the format, but man, every single format we've had for the last like 2 to 3 years is very, very graveyard centric. So this card is actually pretty good. It's pretty decent versus Drytron. It's not great versus Tri Brigade, I will say that, but there are situations where it can be okay. But yeah, I think overall you just gotta hold on to this. This is not a hard once return. Same thing with Veiler. So playing 3 of in a deck, seeing 2 of it isn't necessarily the worst thing as long as it's a matchup where it can hit them. I think DD Crow is going to be pretty good at certain points. Maybe even it's just as a side deck card. And that's the thing too. We're considering main deck and side deck. These are just going to be nice to have, even if they're not main deck worthy. They're going to be really, really nice to just have at the ready to side in when you do play, example, a graveyard centric deck. Next up is Skullmeister. This is another one you can get for under $1 because it has 1 million common printings. This card's actually pretty good. Just negates any effect activated in the graveyard. Again, not once per turn. So you could play 3 of all 3 of these. You could see 3 Veilers activate all 3 of them in the same turn, just to guarantee your opponent doesn't resolve their stuff. Same thing with Meister, same thing with Crow. There's a really good one, especially with Prank Kids being a really strong deck right now. If you cannot have Ash Blossom, you need to have something like Meister. You absolutely have to have something like this, because the way you stop their 1-card combo is by negating that first Prank Kid and praying they don't have an extender. And this guy kind of does the same thing as Ash there. So that's what I'm saying, is like pseudo cards that kind of do the same thing as cards that like non-budget players would be playing. This card kind of covers that as far as the Prank Kid matchup goes. So very, very important. I think this one's probably a must grab as well. Next up, Artifact Lancia. So Tri-Brigade is pretty good. I would say Valor's good against Tri-Brigade, but I wouldn't say that either of these are particularly good versus Tri-Brigade. I know you can negate a Nerve All, but like if they have one extender, they just play through that so freely and easily and get the same board out of it. So it's okay versus that deck, but not great. Also, they can chain block things. And then you have Lancia. This card just outright says they can't banish for the entire turn. So Tri-Brigade just passes. They really can't play through this card like at all. So I really like that. Obviously having the ability to pass. Also dinos on like the Rogue ladder tend to be pretty popular. So this stops that. And really when you go around and look at it, there's actually more decks that banish than you really think. So this card actually covers a decent amount of matchups and it's high impact. This is definitely like one of those potential like turn skip type cards, which is really, really good. So I like Lancia. You would have thought it's not as good this format, but it's actually pretty solid. And kind of in the same vein, I would say Chaos Hunter is also something to consider. So this card says, if your opponent special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can discard a card to special summon this card from the hand, and while it's on the field, your opponent cannot banish cards. So a little bit more longevity than Lancia, but your opponent could have the possibility of like having removal for this card, and when they do just completely free themselves up. There you do have to discard, but ideally you'd want to be playing in a deck that would have a decent amount of discards anyway. But still, I think all things considered, this is probably an undervalued hand trap. You get a 2500 body. If you're playing a deck that wants discard outlets anyway, this card is really nice. And if you're playing at something like Tri-Brigade, this is huge. If they do their first banish to get like something like Bear Brum out, you can then just like chain this, or Farragut, you can just chain this, and now they're locked out of extending anymore for the turn. Especially if they didn't get Bear Brum, they wouldn't have been able to search. Or if they went, if they went Farragut, they wouldn't be able to make, well, they might be able to make Bear Brum for the rest of the turn. But still, you're very, very like solidly like condensing their play and making them not be able to go full combo. So there are instances like that. There's other decks too where this definitely comes up, and really, really solid. Like this versus Eldritch is just like game. If they can't put Eldritch on field, they just lose. They just straight up lose. So very, very cool. I think, okay, one more. The last thing I want to throw at you, not necessarily a hand trap, but it is Dino Wrestler Pankratops. I know it's only at 1 on the list right now. We'll see what happens with that, but this is a card you just want. This card is just one of the, it's just like an automatic one of you probably want in every one of your decks. Just a one of in the side deck probably. Probably not the main deck, but still, this card is so generically good, so easy to summon. It's a disruption. You go summon it going second, beat over something, and then use it to remove another card. It almost always baits out at least 1, if not 2 interruptions by himself, and that's without your normal summon. So it frees up you via your opponent's disruptions to be able to attempt to extend with the rest of your hand, only taking up 1 card, which is really, really solid. So definitely a one of you're going to want to have. This card's under $1. Like I said, all of these you can find copies for under $1. I don't know if a playset would be under $1 for all of them, but you can at least find copies, singular copies that'll be under $1. So under 20 bucks easily. I mean, probably less than 15 bucks, you would have a playset of all 6 of these cards. And you only need 1 pank, so don't even worry about that. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good start there. I do want to move to the next portion, which is just like the slightly higher stuff. It's not even crazy. It's just stuff that's like maybe $1 a copy to $2 a copy, really. And it's not that many cards. It's just things that I think like would also be really handy, because I don't think these hand traps, they can be a little bit specific. If you're not playing a graveyard centric deck, DD Crow and Meister aren't great. And if they're not a graveyard centric deck, it also probably means that Chaos Hunter and Artifact Lancia aren't great. So Valor really becomes the only generic hand trap versus a non-graveyard deck. I think about Madolche. Like, I don't really trust any of these other 4 hand traps outside of Valor versus something like Madolche. So there we go. We've got Ghost Ogre here. I believe her gold rare copy is about $2 a copy. So that's right in that like mid-range, not expensive, but not like super, you know, penny stock budgety. But I think this card's a really nice one, right? It has a weird interaction that a lot of people are not going to be expecting because not a lot of hand traps interact like Ogre does. And so you can actually catch people off guard and put them in really awkward positions because even meta players, they practice to play around Ash and Nib and Droll and Ghostbell. That's what they practice to play around. They don't practice to play around Ogre. So sometimes you can really catch them in an awkward spot if you time it well, use it at the right moment. And so I think Ogre is a pretty good one just to have anyway. Next up is Gamma. I think this is like an absolute must. Absolute must. If you are okay with spending the whatever it is, $1 to $2 for a copy of Gamma, you do need the driver, but you can find even cheaper copies of driver, I think. This is a really big one, even for a going first deck, especially if you're playing a deck that plays something like Desires or these cards that people might be wanting to Ash going second to keep you off of like hella card advantage. Gamma can be huge. It's not only going to stop that and allow you to resolve, but also get you 2 bodies on the field. And going second, it's one of the best hand traps. It's not just Ash negating an effect there. This is a negate and destroy. So you not only negate, but you remove the card you're negating as well. I think it's insanely strong. I think a budget player would really want to have high impact hand traps like this, and this one generically, it's going to work in any matchup. Every deck's playing monsters, every deck's activating monster effects. I think this is probably like a really important one. I think if I were to pick one out of this mid range, that like I would say get this. If you only have enough money to spend on one of these mid range cards to get a play set, get the Gammas and the driver because you need them. So good. And then we have Kaijus. Kaijus used to be way less budget, but right now a lot of them have reprints. I think almost all of them have reprints at this point, but you can find most of them for max $2, but some of them, if you're getting specific ones, I think you can get a couple of them from under $1. You just want like a cluster of different ones, and depending on the deck you're playing, you might want specific ones, but I would just say, listen, we've covered a lot of hand traps here. This is really good side deck stuff for, like, you know, if you're ever playing against stuff like Sky Strikers, like Kaijus are so good. It not only clears their monster without giving them a way to chain ray, but it also turns off any of their Sky Striker spells and traps, or well, spells. So no Widow Anchor, no even on their next turn, if they can't clear this card, no Afterburner, no Jamming Waves, no Engage, none of that stuff. They cannot activate them if they have something in their main monster zone. So that's actually really solid. There's also other decks like combo decks where you just get to like completely, you know, negate whatever not negate, but, you know, get rid of whatever the scariest one monster they have on field is, which is really, really solid. So I would recommend it. At some point, again, there's more Kaijus than there are hand traps, and I don't think you really want to play set of every Kaiju, so just keep that in mind. But you can find most of them for $2, if not like just above $2. And that's another like addition to a generic side deck that could be very, very solid, depending on the deck you are playing. Which takes us to our last card here, which goes slightly up a step. This card, Fantasia, is about $4-ish a copy from what I've seen, maybe $5. It's another one of those good ones. I don't think it's quite expensive enough to call it like not budget. I still think $5 is still pretty budget. I would just say, I get it. If you're a budget player and you're not ready for this, that's fine. I would just say this is a really nice one. So many decks play Links. Links are by far and away still the very best like extra deck mechanic in the game. And so a lot of decks are just going to link summon at some point, and this card becomes a huge consistency piece, gives you a 2400 body. It's a +1 every time you use it. It's really solid, gives you targeting protection. It really does a lot of things that if you're just in a link matchup, like this card just is going to be so huge. It really is going to like give you such a strong edge. So it's a card I would definitely consider. Again, not the most budget, but a very, very powerful card nonetheless. And I don't know. I definitely would recommend it if this fits into your current budget. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for today. I didn't want to go too in depth here, keeping it simple for you guys, giving you the 10 or so cards that I think are like the first things you need to look at as far as monsters. If this series does well, I might continue and go into spells, might go into traps, and then go into like extra deck monsters as well that you just want to have no matter what deck you're playing. Because if you switch it up somewhat, you know, those cards will translate from deck to deck, and that's what you want. You just want that core of staples that can continue to move over, and you don't have to continue to buy new staples every time you try to play a new deck. You just want to have to buy that core. So, yep, that's going to do it for me here today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know in the comment section down below if you think there's anything specifically I missed with main deck monsters that you would say are like super stapley, like you want to have them and also fit into the budget requirements we're using today. But that's going to do it for me here today. Thank you again. I will see you in the next one, and peace.